Are we keeping up with a Commodore? All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Commodore 64.
The Good Work.
And BFG Super FX3. All this and more coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 19th of July, 2025. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, Twirlers. How are you all? Joining me, Dave, today, we have Chris.
We do. That's me.
And we also have Jason.
I'm very glad to be joined. Thank you.
Have you had a good week, guys?
Jason first.
Okay, I didn't make exciting keyboard purchases or entire system purchases, but yes, I have otherwise had a very good week. Some retro research for this week's show for sure. Some Comedy of Errors. We're hitting full stride on that show. It will have just opened by the time you're watching this. So yeah, right in the thick of all the retro media I can handle.
Fantastic. Well, at time of this going to air, I would have just won a Street Fighter 2 championship competition. How good's that? Or I would have just been knocked out in the first round in a Street Fighter 2 championship competition.
Which champion will you be playing as?
So I don't know. Ryu, because it's the only one I know, and I couldn't be bothered to learn another one. Yeah, Ryu, sit there, throw fireballs, and try and do spinning kicks. And if I get stuck, just go for the low sweep the leg. Just like I did in Mortal Kombat, basically. Sweep the leg.
Good luck.
Works every time.
Good luck. I hope you're victorious. I have I have built my new PC, just finished it. It is ridiculous. I've got a 5090, a 9950 X3D, big massive fractal case for it. I'm delighted with it. First time I built a PC for myself since 2018, so it was long overdue. I even got a new phone because my phone broke last week. I spent all my money for years. And I've been busy with that, but I'm delighted with it. And hopefully it will mean no more crashing of the recording during a session, which was the whole reason I bought it. And I needed a 5090 for that, obviously. Couldn't be doing with anything less. Shall we get into it? We're going to try and hit our target for the time this week because poor Duncan has been stuck in the British heat wave, sweating over his editing during the week every night last week. We were over that last week. We were over the week before. Poor Duncan is terrible. Thanks to us, it's our fault. So this week we're going to be right on time, aren't we, guys?
Yeah, British heat waves are quite serious. I've heard sometimes it can get to just over 20.
It was 27 degrees here, and
God,
that's ridiculous.
That's a bit nippy.
Oh.
Let's get on with the show.
There is a Mastertronic game. So that's the £1.99 game you'd get from the corner shop or the chemists on tape that I had as a kid for my CPC called Nighttime. And that's time spelt with a Y and not an I. And on the front cover, there's a speech bubble between one of the characters saying, "Time and tide, wait for no man." Now, I don't know why, but that quote has stuck with me for 40 years. They weren't the first people to say that quote, of course, but that quote has stuck with me for 40 years. And every time things are moving fast, things are happening too quickly for me to keep up with, it's that speech bubble from that tape game that comes straight into my head. Time and tide, wait for no man. 2 weeks ago, we discovered and we covered YouTuber Perifractic, also known as Christian Symptoms, 2 videos where he had decided to try to acquire the rights to the Commodore branding from Commodore BV. And the way the videos looked, it was a developing story that was happening as we were watching it. And we thought that would be it for a while. We said between us, they wouldn't be wise to cover it again until things are substantially clearer and moved on. We weren't even sure if we would give it main story coverage again, maybe just updates. Well, time and tides, twirlers. He finished video 2 with a 2-week timer for video 3, where he said he'd reveal a new product. And my, I think at the time, very reasonable expectation were that it would be a prototype or even talk of a prototype. Turns out that his videos were, let's say, intentionally deceptive around timescales and the viewer and how the viewer was directed to understand things. You could argue that it's creative license, that he did indeed tell the story of how it happened, but he's turned up the drama for entertainment purposes. Or you could feel like I was a little bit misled, because this has all been happening for months in the background. When he started to make the first video, he knew what the position was, but he made the first video as if he didn't. In any case, though, he now has a product ready, and it's on sale with expected shipping in October and November. So what is this product? Well, it is a Commodore 64 remade in FPGA, so Field Programmable Gate Arrays. This means it should be extremely accurate, and it will feel like you're using a real Commodore 64. And unlike the real Commodore 64, it will have modern features. It will accept modern power supplies. It'll have flash storage, disk emulation, HDMI out, and other things. And it doesn't have a fragile SID or CIA chip, and it doesn't have RAM chips that are infamously unreliable, like all of Commodore's stuff was. And I'll pass on to Jason soon on this, because he really is the expert on it. For quite humorous reasons, he's the expert on it. It is crowdfunding, though, and it's $300 plus taxes or tariffs and shipping. And there are more expensive clear ones available, and a Founders Edition at $200 more. But the one I like is the $300 one that looks exactly like, well, to my eyes, I'm sure a proper Commodore 64 aficionado may say differently, but to my eyes, it looks exactly like an original Commodore 64, at least from the front. I'm sure the ports at the back will be different. I do have some concerns about it, but I want to say that I am overall very positive about it, much more positive than I was a couple of weeks ago when we were looking at the Commodore acquisition. There's 4 things I wanted to highlight, though, as concerns. Just the first is that it seems too good to be true. The Spectrum Next Edition 2 was more expensive than this, and they had a cost overrun, and that was a few years ago. This is already cheaper than what that was before their cost overrun and before inflation. The second is the time window. He's taking orders right now and aims to ship in October, November. Now, that seems not just ambitious, but outright brave, and brave in the euphemism sense of the word brave, as in, I don't think so. However, I think with what he's offering, people will give him a few months' grace if it is late. And in fact, he's self-aware enough to be able to tell you to tick a box. You'd have to tick a box to say that you're aware that it might be delayed. The third is the refund guarantee. He says he'll refund minus transaction fees at any point. And while that might sound reassuring and much better than any other form of crowdfunding like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, if you think about it, the reason that you might ask for a refund is because the project's gone all wrong. And if he's still talking about it 2 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, like many, many Kickstarters have gone, if that happens and everyone asks for a refund, they're not going to get a refund. And the fourth, the final one, is that the specifications say original Commodore 64 ROMs will be included under license or via guided ROM setup on first boot, which means that he's yet to license the operating system. And the guided ROM setup, now to me, I think it sounds as if it may be supplied without ROMs and the end user has to load them on, which is fine, but it just indicates how perhaps not quite ready this is. That said, though, I am still overall positive because this is tremendous value, and I've gone ahead and paid for one. So I think it's great value for what it is. I've stuck my money where my mouth is. But let's bring in Jason, who really is the expert, and with a question about the elephant in the room. This is new, but it's kind of not new. Right. Explain what that means, Jason.
Right. It's fundamentally not new, but my argument is that considering what's being promised, the fact that there's proven technology inside is an unambiguously good thing. Multiple sources, including...
That's an advantage, yeah.
Multiple sources, including the creator Gideon Schweitzer himself, have confirmed that the motherboard inside this unit is the Ultimate 64 Elite 2 board, which by a wild coincidence, Dave and I spoke about at the top of last week's show. Let's revisit Dave and Jason from just 1 week ago. I got my new Ultimate 64, which is the FPGA implementation of the Commodore 64 and a bunch of add-ons integrated. Long journey. You usually order these things several months in advance, and which is what I did. And it was a long journey from Central Europe to here, but it's here. It's installed. I've been copying things over to it, so that's been my excitement.
How does it feel using an FPGA Commodore 64 compared to a real one? Have you convinced yourself it's real?
I have convinced myself that it is as real as I need it to be and far beats a lot of the alternatives. Thank you, Dave and Jason, from 1 week ago. In a statement that he made on the Facebook group that's dedicated to discussion of his products and motherboard replacements, Schweitzer explained that there are some minor modifications that have been made to the board to accommodate like the new case and keyboard and LED strip a little better. And he also confirms what I'd guessed at from images on Simpson's Commodore website. There will be a new interface for all the various configuration menus in the Ultimate, which I think will make it easier for new owners to use. So yeah, having used Ultimate boards in recent past, including this new one here, I can say the experience of using an Ultimate 64 is extremely good and extremely authentic. It switches between NTSC and PAL operation easily. That used to be a thing that people were trading chips, across the ocean to do in the past. There's built-in SID chip capability, providing what I say is authentic sound, plus 2 sockets for classic SID or dedicated SID replacements if you want to go that route. There's built-in machine acceleration, which helps out with slower programs, demos, and games. Emulation for 2 floppy drives internally, supports all the major disk image formats. Support for 99% of all of the cartridges sold for the C64, old and new. Mass storage emulator, similar in principle to the SD2IEC devices that have been cheap and plentiful everywhere. Support for printing to PNG image files. There's built-in support for the Commodore RAM expansion unit memory. And the vast majority of external peripherals for the Commodore 64 work on this thing. The major exception is that user port devices that go in the left portion of the machine do need a breakout board from internal motherboard pins because the user port area is given over to USB ports and HDMI out. But that's a win for anything that you're likely to want to do with it today because you get built-in Ethernet and Wi-Fi, which takes care of most of the connectivity needs that user port would be covering for you. In short, I say everybody should be thrilled that this is the architecture at the core of a new Commodore 64 being brought out for sale. If you're going to do it in FPGA, use Gideon's. That is exactly the way to do it. The first Ultimate 64 was disclosed almost 8 years ago to the day. We did a little bit of research, so this is a proven platform. The next key component to this new Commodore 64 Ultimate, as it's being branded, is, well, it's the one with the keys. Multiple sources, including Gideon, confirm that the keyboard is being supplied by Jim Drew, who is a Commodore 64 hardware and software developer who goes all the way back to the 1980s. And in recent years, he has been bringing keycap projects and the Blingboard keyboard replacement to the market. Gideon says that this keyboard is good. Specifically, he calls it, quote, the best new mechanical keyboard currently available, end quote. I will take his word for it on that. The Ultimate motherboard does work best when it's connected to an authentic Commodore-style keyboard, although USB keyboards are supported. There really have not been a ton of great and inexpensive drop-in keyboard options for C64 users. All those original keyboards are over 30 years old, if not more, so this is a good development. And finally, the case that holds it all is reportedly coming from Retrofusion, whose shop has already been selling Commodore 64 cases for some time. And Gideon asserts and reassures everybody that these 3 components have been selected to work together in harmony. Does seem like that would be the case, no pun intended. I can only directly speak to the quality of the Ultimate motherboard in this case. Again, I think it is extremely good. It does what I want Commodore 64 in 2025 to do for me. I paid US $225.52 for it at the very end of 2024.
Sorry, how much did you pay?
$255.52. Maybe I said $225. $255.52 at the end of 2024. And at the time, I had no idea that for just a few dollars more, I might be offered the chance to buy a completely new machine.
I'm sorry for laughing at you, Jason, but it's just, we were speaking about this last week.
Yep.
So we've been chatting since this video came out on Saturday and the website opened up. Commodore.net, by the way, the website. We've been chatting about it trying to get out what the details of this are, I think almost instantly people recognize the three constituent parts of it. But over the next day or so, it finally got confirmed and confirmed. And I think we're pretty sure now the three parts, what they are. You said $255 is what you paid for the board. The keyboard, which is the Bling board, is still in crowdfunding, and it is a year late from what it was supposed to be. But from the updates, it appears to be pretty close to being finished. Best I can tell, people haven't got, the bulk of the people who backed it haven't got the keyboard yet. Maybe there's a few prototypes out there, but it looks as if they had manufacturing problems, which I think are now coming to an end. So it's a good timing for it. $129 was supposed to be the retail price of this keyboard. The case from Retrofusion is $100. So the price for getting these things separately is $485, making the $300 price tag especially attractive. Not just because you get all three parts for much less money, but because, as Jason brushed on earlier on, they're having to put these things together, meaning that the compatibility and the fit is down to them. It's a problem for them to work out. You could buy all these three parts, put them together, and find it doesn't sit quite right and have to get the hot glue gun out to try and get things to sit properly. That's their problem to sort out. They're going to have to make little adjustments, as Jason said, to make this fit. So you end up getting this really compelling offering. The final thing I'll say, though, is that the Issue 2 Spectrum Next uses the same FPGA chip as this, exactly the same FPGA chip. So this means that your C64 isn't just limited in terms of the scope of the FPGA to do just a Commodore 64. It can do much more than a normal Commodore 64. You said acceleration. It's capable of that. There may be an enhanced mode developed just like the Next has. It's possible that cores are created or ported to it, meaning that your C64 Ultimate could also moonlight as an Atari ST or an Amiga or a Capcom arcade machine, for all things. Could be Street Fighter 2. It's definitely possible of doing those things. It's not identical to the Spectrum Next hardware. It's not identical to any of the other FPGAs out there, but I don't think it's a lot of work, a huge amount of work to port these things to it. So I would be surprised if eventually it doesn't get these things. One final thing I'll say, I don't think this was required to have the acquisition of the Commodore brand. This is the good thing as far as I'm concerned. The Commodore brand, I don't really care about, with the exception that the Commodore brand has maybe created the hype and interest that has caused this to go on sale and sell what seems to be thousands already. Such a huge amount of interest that's made these economies of scale possible to sell something that would have cost $485 or whatever and a lot of hassle in something that can arrive and be plugged in for $300. So maybe that's the benefit of that. So yeah, it's what a journey we've been on the past few weeks. What a timeshare sales pitch. Do you get timeshare sales pitches in America, Jason?
Oh, you bet we do.
Thing? You do. You know what that means then. That's fine. Yeah. Drama, Hollywood, entertainment. But at the bottom of it, a lot of people who know exactly what they're doing are behind this and making this. It's not just a YouTube channel with a guy that likes a bit of entertainment going on. An actor from Star Wars. Chris?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, it does tie in with the acquisition because obviously that's how they can call it, the Commodore 64, right? So, and for some people, that will mean... You could license a name. You could license it, yeah, I guess, but now it's...
Which we actually think is probably what's happened at this point.
Maybe, yeah, you might be right. Well, along with that, it seems, because obviously they've got the new website, as you mentioned, and they've got a heap of Commodore-branded stuff available on the website. I think I was the one that said I don't think they're going to do that, but there's T-shirts and stuff all available straight away. And they're also selling things like the Arcade Eye joystick, which is a natural fit if you're trying to sell a product like this that you want to sell a controller with it. That's great. And I also think at the end of the day, if you want to sell some T-shirts and mugs and stuff, I mean, I'm going to add them to my Christmas list because that's a good way to then fund everything else they're trying to achieve, right? So I don't have a problem with that. The C64 that they're producing looks absolutely stunning from what we've seen, I have to admit. Unlike you, Dave, I'm not going to buy one, but that's nothing to do with the product or it's nothing to do with new Commodore. That's to do with me. I don't have nostalgia for the C64, so this isn't something I personally would put my money into. I'm more of a Spectrum guy, and I've mentioned before, I feel like I missed out by not jumping on the Spectrum Next. But actually, when I think about it, I'm not that gutted about that. I'm more gutted that we never got the Spectrum from Retro Games Limited in Australia. So I haven't got one of them. And that I would like more than the Next, which is bizarre because at the end of the day, it's a nice, cheap looking, not cheap looking, it's a nice looking, cheap emulation box. Had to get that the right way around. But I would prefer that than the Spectrum Next because that's where I'm coming from. So I'm actually really looking forward to the A1200 from Retro Games Limited, hopefully later this year as well. I do think these wonderful FPGA machines, they're just not my cup of tea, even though they're absolutely fantastic and they're more legit, closer to the original chipsets and stuff than emulation would be. But it's just not for me. I'm cheap, I'm paranoid, and I'm happy to pay much less for an emulation box.
Link in the show notes to Commodore.net if you do want to buy it. As I've said, I bought it, but it is crowdfunding. So if you buy it and you don't get anything and you lose your money, don't blame me. We are sponsored this week, thank you very much, by PCBWay.com. Thank you very much, PCBWay. PCBWay make PCBs, CNC milling. They will get your they will print your board for you, and they will put the birdseed, the little surface mounted stuff on it for you if you want to. They'll do lots of different things, 3D printing as well. But we like their shared project library. Jason, have you been looking at that recently?
Yeah, shared project library is a great place to either grab a design and put it into action for yourself, or take it and build and improve. This week they're highlighting a few. There's a dedicated stand-up reminder countdown timer. It's a 4-element, 7-segment LCD display, or LED display, meant to help you take a break and move your body on schedule if you don't have a bit on your wrist that's doing that for you already. There's also a DSP terminal unit for RTTY. So if you're an amateur radio enthusiast and you're interested in teletype support, there's a very cool project box here. It looks like it came straight out of, I'm going to say about 1979. So if you are part of the international amateur radio scene, you got a TTY adapter there for you at PCBWay and thousands more designs.
So thank you for sponsoring us, PCBWay.com.
One of my favorite short stories of all time is The Good Work by Theodore L. Thomas. It was first published in 1959. It's set in a far-off human future in which technological advances and heavy automation have produced that human society in which everybody is virtually guaranteed the bare necessities, food, shelter, health, and long life, but they're not getting much more than those bare necessities. Nobody really has to do anything, and so there are virtually no jobs and therefore basically no upward mobility. Our protagonist in the story yearns for something just a little better, and with great effort lands an actual job, which affords his family a little more comfort, a little more variety to their lives. He is given a job maintaining the safety of the enormous building, the Arcology, that he and a billion others live in, on the strict condition that he must never disclose what he does for that job to anyone at all, ever. And what the reader learns, and what the protagonist learns and does not learn from there, make this an amazing tale, which I highly recommend you seek out. And I mentioned this story because Dr. Local this week pointed us to a March 1980 BBC documentary just released on the BBC Archive YouTube channel entitled The Silicon Factor, and What of the Future. It's a 25-minute documentary which starts out highlighting exciting advances in automation, a heavily automated train system in Washington, D.C., automated price scanners with UPC barcodes in a Texas supermarket, and then gradually starts rolling out the heavy hitters to talk about the inevitable impact of that technology, that automation, and that catch-all term of computer chips and what they're going to do to society. And that impact, in short, will be a massive shift in how, when, and why people are employed. Dave, you chuckled over there as I talked about the barcode scanners. What did that trigger?
Yeah, just in the 80s, we talked about these things that now just no one has any interest in at all. They're just so mundane. Just in the 80s, talking about scanning things, barcodes on shopping, rather than typing in at the till was this magical technology, and now it's just mundane.
Yeah, it's taken as given, but remember, yeah, right? Cashiers before then would be expected to memorize 90% of the prices for the most common items and be lightning fast at doing lookups in a spiral bound book next to them, and price scanners did away with all of that. So before I get too deep into the predictions they make, did you guys ever like when you were younger consider a job, really expect that you were going to do a job that was made obsolete by technology before you could get there?
Kind of, yes, and kind of. I'm going to come on to it later on because you're going to ask a thing in more detail, but kind of no, but yes, but no.
In the context of what you've just said, I think cashier jobs, they haven't disappeared, but they've certainly diminished a lot. And that wasn't because of the barcode; it was because of self-checkout. But yeah,
but you don't get self-checkout without barcodes.
Without the barcodes,
and automated payments and all that stuff. Yeah,
unless they want us to make up the prices.
Neil's not on the show anymore.
Oh, well done. For those who don't know, Neil, when he was younger, went to a shop to buy a computer game, picked up 2 games. You had the one he wanted, which was dear, and you had the one he didn't want, which was cheap, and he swapped the price stickers over.
Okay. Sorry, Neil. I sold you out.
Criminal.
Well, so the documentary is a really well-told, well-crafted story, by the way. I know it's trite to chirp about attention spans of the kids these days, and I'm not going to pretend that everybody in 1980 was going to carve out 25 minutes of their life to watch this documentary. But I will say it uses the time allocated really well. It sucks the viewer in with a glance at those impressive examples of automation. And I can't help but wonder if the BBC crew deliberately chose American destinations to lead the story, whether it was a sense of, we must not fall behind, or simply to give the story a more exotic flavor.
We very much in Britain in the 80s and 90s felt that America was more advanced than us. And in many ways it was, and in many ways it wasn't, but we had this perception that everything American was shiny and new and in the future.
Yeah, I did wonder about something. When I was able to visit while it was still operating, I was able to hang out with some of my editors at CU Amiga at one point, and just in talking about, transatlantic, cultural exchanges and whatever, one of them, I don't remember which, just as an offhand remark, when I was talking about kind of the impact of, British accents seeming fancy in America, they said, yeah, and at the same time, we don't believe something unless an American tells us. So I did wonder if that might have been a factor here. But yeah, once it goes through that stuff in Washington, D.C. and Texas, it kind of rolls out, more of the heavy hitters in the UK, and they get to the real message that livelihoods that are today as of 1980, being taken for granted are by no means guaranteed. Highlights in the documentary include almost every one of the interviews that's featured. And that includes technology experts, leaders at Citibank and at IBM UK, labor researchers, educators. I particularly enjoyed the detailed tour they did of Citibank's New York offices that had various automated services. It had the prescience to mention the fact that there's this automated mail delivery cart roaming the hallways, making the inter-office human mail carrier obsolete, but that it itself is very likely to soon be rendered obsolete by the growth of electronic mail, which I'm quite sure came to pass. The time they spend with Secretary Cheryl Weinthal is a particular delight. I would say watch this just for her alone, as she sits at her fancy workstation and explains how she and her computer keep a bank leader working efficiently. That workstation is complete with a CRT that's designed to be rotated 90 degrees depending on the application you're in. I really want to know more about what that was. And there's also a really telling moment about how people's interactions with technology and just who uses technology has changed, because she alludes to not really trusting that executive to be able to edit documents or type properly. Today, of course, all but the most tippy-top executive is expected to do a lot of the work that a fleet of secretaries would have once done for them in 1980, from doing their own typing, booking their own travel, filing their own expenses. This used to be handled by the literal floor of secretaries that you see in that documentary. A lowlight that made me groan was a segment from Edinburgh University where a group of students were using the logo language, which focuses on moving a turtle cursor around, drawing geometric shapes. That segment was replete with the robot turtle on the floor holding a pen as it runs over a big piece of paper.
How can you not like that?
It's so trite, and nobody cares about logo. The only people that cared about logo were the people that were trying to sell you something. Go on.
You're not right. My friend bought one of those turtles and restored it recently.
Good. I'm sure that was a fun. I'm sure that was a fun project.
You are right.
Yeah. No, it appeared. It appeared more than halfway through the doc, and when it hit, I'm like, oh, of course they tried to make logo a thing in this. Yes, I earnestly believe it was a scam put forward as a way to help normies relate to computer programming, because commands look like plain English, forward 90, right 90, blah, blah, blah. The robots draw on paper. It's easy to sell the story that computers understand plain English commands and do lots of things in the physical world, which, I mean, they can, but it took a while to get there. I really think it's not until like Pascal and C start becoming mainstream in the second half of the 1980s that these industry thinkers stopped trying to pretend that logo was important. Anyway.
Poor turtle.
The documentary was pretty spot on. Now, it doesn't always come right out and say, this job, that job is going to go away, but it did highlight several fields which were being automated into obsolescence. In the spirit of the thing, I thought I would completely unscientifically identify some jobs which were on the rise or would continue to grow into the 1990s and beyond, but are in decline today. Again, this is not scientific and in no particular order, but the joystick repairman, the death of the decathlon-style game means there's a lot less joystick waggling out there. Well, there's one client for you. And frankly, fewer true joysticks out there in the world. The rise of the D-pad and the little stubby hat. We just don't have those wagglers anymore. The techno-fitness model. Now, as noted in our recent discussions of computer magazines in the past, and this is very cruel of those of you who've put them out of work, there just aren't as many opportunities for working models with impressive physiques to book a high-profile cover gig holding an MP3 player any longer. This was good work for the people who could get it, people. Screenshot photographer. Yes, in order to get good photos for box covers and magazines, there was a special apparatus you'd put in front of a CRT. It would block out all the other light. The camera would stick out the other end. It's a technique for calibrating your film camera to get the settings just right so you had the best chance of catching all those glowing phosphors before they faded. All gone now. Rock solid screenshots at the push of a button.
The screenshots are better. The CRT screenshots are better. Neil has used them in a few videos more recently, and they actually look better than just screen grabs. So they're a little bit lost there.
And of course, the deadest field of all, the logo instructor. But they went down fighting to the last breath, I'm sure. So, Dave, you teed up that you were going to tell us more about the job you wanted, but that was obsolete before you got there.
Yeah. So the job that I wanted was a computer operator.
Okay.
So I'd always been obsessed with technology, from seeing arcade games as a tiny wee guy to getting hold of my first micro, and up to the point when I was maybe 10, 15 years old in the 80s. A computer operator was a job that might exist, because not everybody had a computer. Most people didn't have a computer. Most people couldn't use a computer. Most people didn't know how to do it. So you would need someone who did, and that would be me. I would be the computer operator. They would come to me, and I would make the computer do the things that needed to be done. And of course, that doesn't exist anymore, because we're all computer operators now, and it's not remarkable that you can operate a computer. But in the 80s, I thought I was going to be the guy that ran the computer. They would come to me, and I would say, I will make that happen for you. And of course, that's not how it went. So the job kind of disappeared and kind of didn't. Do you get what I mean now?
Chris, how did the march of technology impact your career dreams and schemes?
It didn't really change, because, I mean, a lot of my career was in IT, and even to this day, you still need to turn them off and on again occasionally. But I always claim, I mean, technology always comes in and shakes things up a bit, but jobs, do they disappear or do they change? Do they evolve? I guess some jobs do eventually disappear, but it's a slow progress. So I think it's down to people in certain industries to just be switched on. And the one that springs to mind over here is mining is very big in Western Australia. In fact, much of Australia. And the mining truck drivers, this is where anybody that can drive a truck can suddenly earn more than anybody else if they're willing to live away, for 2 weeks at a time from their family and drive a truck up and a very big truck, mind you, right? But drive a truck up and down a hill. That's what the job requires. I know guys that do it, and this isn't insulting them. They'll tell you the same thing. But technology is starting to move into, do we have remotely operated trucks, or do we even have AI automated trucks? And so those jobs potentially will disappear down the track. It hasn't got there yet. But in the meantime, those jobs are kind of evolving. So there's still work for truck drivers, and also freight trains are facing the same sort of change. But, will it be that the physical truck driver of today becomes the remote truck driver of tomorrow? And then, if they're switched on enough, becomes the person that assists in, working out automation or, plotting routes for up and down a mine site. Somebody's still got to give it some kind of intelligence for these things to work as the mine site needs them to. So the job will change. Not saying there it will be less jobs, though, which there may well be. This video comes from an era, we were all being born or had been born, or grown up when this video came out. We all found jobs, but I guess you could argue some of the jobs that we found didn't exist, even just 10 years before this video dropped or 20. But, we all still found employment. So I don't think it's a scary thing, except, and funnily enough, just before we started recording, I just read something I wasn't even aware of. Jason, I don't know if you're more aware of this, but the fact that Microsoft are in the process of some quite large layoffs, apparently.
Oh, yeah. The third one this year. Yeah.
And the story seems to be that it's because of their investment into AI. And I think AI is potentially the next big shakeup. In our day, it was the computer, jumping from pools of typewriters to computers on every desk. That was quite a big change. And now we're looking at AI changing things once again. And the thing that I think of is the fact that my boy Zach's just done his degree in games art design, lots of 3D modeling, animation, and that kind of stuff, and coding. And how much is everything that he's just learnt potentially in the next, let's say 20 years, kind of disappear. But again, you just got to be switched on. You've got to be ahead of the curve and see that the requirement for that creative skill set hasn't disappeared. It's just the tools that you'll potentially use to, realize your vision are changing. And so you have to be, one step in front and be ready to use those tools.
Yeah, and it's happened to me. I would say that more than one of my clients, former writing clients, has turned to the large language model. Somebody that I wrote for extensively, a decade or so ago, when we reconnected recently, he said flat out like, "Oh yeah, it's great. I just feed the information that would have been a case study that I used to write for him. I feed it in, and it's fine. You maybe have to clean it up a little bit." So yeah, it's coming for those elevated skills as well. But yeah, this documentary does a great job of kind of establishing what became known as the services-based economy, which we are still in. What happened to manufacturing is kind of a story for another time. It certainly still exists, and people are still making things by hand. They just tend to not be your neighbors in the English-speaking world anymore. Anyway, there's a lot of really cool classic tech on display in this doc, including a sneak peek at some early Philips optical disc tech, some discussion of early email as a competitive advantage among the small number of companies using it. And the talking heads really set out some clear predictions and prescriptions for the years that followed, including job retraining, a shift towards a heavier leisure to work balance. I was particularly intrigued by a line by Jim Howe, who at the time was the head of the Department of Artificial Intelligence at Edinburgh University. And it was clearly something that he'd honed and perfected as a way to explain emerging computer tech of the time to people who were nowhere near immersed in it. His quote was, "Think of programming a computer as actually disciplining the mind in a way that is reminiscent of the teaching of Latin. People used to argue that learning Latin disciplined your thought, and when you program a computer, you really have to think out the problem very precisely in a step-by-step fashion. So this is like a new Latin." Welcome to Housekeeping, where I would like to lead off by thanking our patrons for their really strong response to our recent poll. We asked just how you prefer to listen or watch to This Week in Retro. Got great response. Basically, half of you, by the time we're recording this today, responded, which is a fantastic response rate. Thank you so much for the interest in taking the time to share how you enjoy This Week in Retro with us. I also would like to apologize. In episode 225, I mistakenly called the shutdown of Linux format the end of Futures format branded magazines. Trevster42 pointed out on the subreddit that Mac format magazine is still an active concern. Its August 2025 issue is still available now. I did dig into the Future brand list, but not deeply enough to verify my statement. I apologize for the error.
I've got a Mac. I should buy that magazine.
I'd like to welcome 2 new patrons. I'd like to welcome Polymat and I'd like to welcome Mark. So thank you very much for both becoming official Twirlers. And I think Twirlers should be looking forward to part 2 of the Q&A. Is that out?
They should have it now, yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Now on to news and briefs. And thank you to Imad This Up. Mac format has printed its last issue, has now closed down. So no, it's not. That's an absolute lie. I suck in this join of you, Jason.
Yeah, you can't do that to me because I see these things at 6:30 a.m. and I'm like, oh no, wait, and then I have to read. Oh, I made this up. All right, fine. Yeah, don't do that to me.
A sad loss to the community. Patman QC, a YouTube creator who specialised in arcade and console documentary-style videos in a very pleasant way, has passed away. Sadly, his channel is still there and it's really worth a watch. So thank you, Chromatic Ore, for letting us know.
Scott Adams wants to know if it's time for him to make another 8-bit 2-word 16K adventure. Thanks to Jason for submitting that.
Jason, is it time for him to do it?
He is asking outright, would enough people buy it? But he hasn't said how much money he wants to make. And I think that's up to him to decide if he wants to disclose that and see what people say.
I'm in two minds because I feel as if I see people and come, yeah, do it. And I'm like, well, are you going to buy it? Yeah. Because it's not fair to tell someone, spend your time on this, but not, it's difficult.
But yeah, I think the next step is on him to just be frank and say, okay, if I sit down and I spend the time required to do a classic original 12 text only, 2-word adventure with all the constraints of that original format, I think he just needs to say, I'm going to need to sell, and these are numbers I'm pulling out of nowhere. I'm going to need to sell 15,000 of them at $5 each, or whatever that mark is, and then
maybe
people can say,
kickstart it.
Yeah,
maybe he needs to kickstart it, but. Maybe. To be honest, the way that text adventures and interactive fiction have gone, the commercial age for them passed away a long time ago, and I don't know. Yeah. I hope there's a living in it for him, but I'm not sure.
In the meantime, Happy Coding ZX linked us to a really good video, how one man convinced his anti-video gaming dad that there was merit in gaming, and how the first game his dad completed is Dark Souls, and he's even streaming it.
I particularly liked this because it fits my pet peeve that gaming should not be considered embarrassing or pointless, and that it is a worthwhile hobby. So I'm glad to see that one person has got over that. Sadly, though, the dad is closer to our ages than the son is. Now, Affectionate Pie has a link to a BBC article that's been talked about a fair bit this week, titled Game Changers, the players saving money by going retro. And I felt it was a good article, but I'm not sure if I felt the headline captured the important stuff. There's many reasons to be into retro, and the cost isn't a big one for me. It's time that I find to play games rather than it's not that I can't afford to buy them. That's not why I'm in retro.
Dracula Hunter, a lost arcade game, has been recreated in Unity based on gameplay footage from YouTube. On the itch.io page, there's a comment from a guy, Steve Tyson, who is delighted and emotional because he's not been able to play the game he loved from 1980 until now.
And thank you to Sorry Analyst 2634 to submitting that.
And finally, from Colony Activist, there's a video from Nathan Baggs, a guy who fixes older games that work on modern systems now. This one is about Discworld Noir. That's considered an important game because it's in there with the official Pratchett Discworld novels, except playable as a game. And there's loads more you can find on our subreddit, which is, Dave?
It is reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
Very good.
Which slash?
/. But I reckon if you put a backslash in your browser, it'll know what to do.
It probably would. It would probably just do it for you. Yeah. So apparently Doom, I always swear we're never going to do another Doom story, but here we are. Apparently Doom can never run on Amiga. Thanks, John. But the Atari Jaguar, It can run on that, which is also 68,000 base. It's not an issue. And neither is the 16-bit SNES. Whatever.
64-bit Jaguar.
Yes. Yes, definitely 64 bits. And keep it in mind, on that point, Dave, keep it in mind that by the time Doom came out, we'd be talking 32-bit Amigas. That was all complete BS anyway. But, the Jag failed harder, I believe, than the A1200 or the A4000 or the CD32. So the development effort on the Jaguar was a total waste of time. Suck it, Romero. What wasn't apparently a waste of time was porting Doom to the then obsolete 16-bit SNES in 1995. That miracle was performed by Randy Linden using his custom reality game engine and the second revision of the Super FX chipset. But he hasn't stopped. Since 1995, Linden has seemingly remained trapped in purgatory with no promise of release to his eternal destiny until such time as he defeats the hordes of hell by making his amazing port a little bit smoother and quite a bit better. And finally, in 2025, he is free. According to Chapter 666, Verse 69 of Time Extension, shared with us by Brassic Gamer, Randy has released a new SNES Doom port using Super FX3. This port, available in cartridge form from Limited Run, has the full blessing of ID/Bethesda. It improves on the original, bringing back many of the game elements that they had to ditch in 1995, including full levels that the original tech couldn't handle, and even adding Episode 4, Thy Flesh Consumed, in its entirety. And Nightmare Mode with respawning enemies is now included as well. And it has improved controls, making circle strafing now possible, and even vibration feedback with compatible controllers. In fact, there's a YouTube link in the article showing footage from the cart, and it begins with a modern-looking Bethesda intro that looks like it would at least need to run off a CD-ROM, but it's not. It's running off the cartridge. This alone would have blown a mid-90s SNES owner's tiny little mind. Then E1, M1 kicks in and runs nice and smooth. Well, 20 frames per second smooth. Wow. Awesome. Actually, this is awesome because it's a SNES, let's be honest. Sure, there are no floor and ceiling textures, and that kind of reminds me of, what was it, the 2 meg version of Alien Breed 3D2 on the Amiga. But I have to say, it does actually look great, and the music sounds amazing. The video also jumps back to footage from 1995, from the 1995 original, and having never played the SNES version of Doom myself, I have to say that actually impressed me more than this upgrade, seeing that running. That's in part because the new version is kind of cheating, of course. It's using a Pi RP2350 running at 150 megahertz inside the cart to do the heavy lifting. So no, this would not have been possible back in 1995. But whatever, it's essentially emulating Super FX at a faster clock speed rather than being a new chipset. At least that's how I understand it. It's Doom running rather well on another thing that isn't an Amiga, and you can buy it. Lads, is this cool, or would you rather I'd pick the story about a PlayStation 2 that you can sleep with?
Who are we mad at? You seem to be working on a lot of issues on this one, Chris.
I am.
Why are we mad?
So many issues.
This helper chip thing is interesting because it was well into the 90s, I think, before I realized which Pitfall 2 on the Atari 2600, which I had, contemporaneously. I didn't realize that it had a helper chip in it. And I think Atari, when they shipped Ball Blazer for the 7800, they dropped an actual Pokey sound chip in there, and they didn't really make a big deal out of it. But it seems like that changed once Nintendo platforms started getting those helper chips. It became, something to market, which good on them. But my question is, are you opposed to the helper chip at all, or just the fact that this one came out so much later than the base machine, or what's the objection?
I don't have any problem with it helping. Like Super FX, I had a SNES when Super FX games started coming out, so I love that in the context of the time. Okay. It's more, when you're using a Pi to do something that wasn't possible back in the day, then I don't see it as much of an achievement as forcing the original, contextual, time period hardware to do more.
Yeah, I just feel like as long as you're being clear about it, like it's been a trend with some of the newer Atari 2600 games that have come out when they'll stick an ARM chip in there and then say, oh, look, Ladybug or whatever's been, look how good it is. And they go like, oh, wait a minute, is this one with an ARM in there? And like then you find out, okay, it is, which I don't mind. I just think it needs to, right, that difference between, are you just so amazing that you've wrung more power out of this machine, or did you put something in there, which still a feat to sync it all up and whatever, but that's a different activity. And just generally impressed that Bethesda would get involved enough to clear this at all. But hey, good for all involved that they did, and this has that legitimacy to it.
Dave?
John Carmack killed the Amiga. And for anyone who doesn't know, Chris is having fun here. He's not actually mad. Some Amiga fan wrote to id Software complaining that Doom didn't get an Amiga port. Maintaining an Amiga could do it. And John Carmack himself replied and said, well, no, it would need a complete rewrite, and it would need only a small subset of Amigas would be powerful enough to run it, and there's just not a big enough market for it. And that was it. But it's been that email exchange that went on to Usenet has been a big thing, a big shibboleth for Amiga users ever since, and it's just a bit of fun now. It's just a bit of fun. I'm not going to go any further into it. There are helper chips, and then there's a Pi, and then at some point the Pi-based acceleration in your computer is not a helper anymore. It's a brain slug, and you're using the rest of the computer as an I/O breakout. And I don't know where the line is. We've talked about these Pico-based devices that are fantastic, and they do a little bit less. They are helpers. They are emulating the sound card. They're emulating the CD-ROM or whatever. So they're helper chips as far as I'm concerned. But there's a certain point, the Amiga, for example, with a Vampire, at which point, hang on, the Amiga has just become an I/O breakout board, and the Vampire is doing everything. So I don't know. It's up to you to decide where it is. I still do maintain, though, that making Doom run on things or running better is all very well, and it is very interesting from a technical perspective. But we have PC Doom, we have the original, and we have the best, and it's easy to get that or a source port running on anything you like. So these projects they're not necessary. They're not bringing Doom to people that can't play it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. But I watched it. I'll have to drop it in the show notes. I watched another video today about how Doom actually ran on the best PC you could buy at the time, being a 4860x66. And it was okay, but it wasn't fantastic. So getting Doom to run well in the context of time, especially on something like a SNES, it is cool. So there you go. The SNES.
Have you seen Fast Doom now, though? Because you can't freeze time and say DOS only gets what you could do at the time, but everything else gets 30 years of evolution. There's a version of Doom called Fast Doom, and it runs amazing on that 486.
Oh, really? I'd have to install that on my 386DX and see how playable that is. Because that's how I played Doom. Yeah. So there you go. The SNES can run Doom again, only it can't because it's a Pi. So can somebody please hurry up and finish Grind using the Dread engine for the A500, because that would have been possible in 1987, and that I'd buy.
On to question of the week, and last week we asked, what are your Psygnosis memories? Good or bad, excitement or disappointment? Tungsten Orchid simply says, oh no, followed by a multitude of green-haired little figures turning into confetti.
Frosty Cheesecake 954. Wipeout was the game that made me get a PlayStation. It was as impressive a tech demo for that machine as Shadow of the Beast was for the Amiga, but it also had a fun game under the brilliant graphics, music, and atmosphere.
Nice. Gog Dave says, big boxes, free t-shirts, great box artwork, and a mixed bag of games.
A few other games are mentioned. There's Walker mentioned, Wipeout again, Blood Money, Menace, Shadow of the Beast.
Destruction Derby was fantastic.
Yeah. And we forget. I tend to forget things like Discworld and so on that Psygnosis went on to do after. I tend to think about the black box games, and they moved on. They did a lot of stuff after that. So thank you very much for your answers. There's lots more to read on the subreddit. And for this week's question of the week, how has technology affected the job that you wanted when you were a kid? Go to our subreddit. Chris, what's the subreddit URL?
Reddit.com/This Week in Retro, I think.
Wrong. Jason,
Reddit.com//This Week in Retro.
Yep.
Yeah, don't forget the R.
I'll do the Patreon address because I don't think we did that back when we were talking
what's
about
the Patreon address? Where can people become
Patreon
members?
address is patreon.com/This Week in Retro.
Cool.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this week, Twirlers. We will see you next week. And bye.
Dave's waving. Jason's waving.
Jason's waving.
I'm
Jason's
not
waving.
waving.
No waving.
I don't care. Yeah, I am waving.
Bye.
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 This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.